I don't know how many generations back. Your grandfather's something way back. Anyway, her name was Keziah Bell, I think was her maiden last name, and she married a singleton man. I don't remember his name either without looking it up. But they were married 5 or 6 years. They had 2 children, and he was sharecropping. A lot of younger people had to start out that way, unless they inherited a farm. But he disappeared. And we've had historians and genealogists and people like that to check, and there's no record of him after the day he left. She always told the children the Indians killed him. But there were not Indians roaming in that territory. This was after the Trail of Tears, I think they called it. They checked the census all over the United States, and he didn't show up on any census after that. He could have left her by choice and changed his name, which is likely what happened. But she couldn't divorce him because she couldn't prove he was dead or alive. In the meantime, several years after he left, her neighbor's wife died. And about 2 years after that, she began having children again, and she had them at regular intervals, had 6 or 8 more children. What adds 2 and 2 together is that we found the cemetery where she's buried, and she's buried next to that neighbor. And his wife is buried on the other side. And some of his children and some of the children she had later, which had to be his, are buried there too. But she never told it or anything. And this Sutter's man that she's buried next to was a colonel in the Civil War. Have you heard of Thomas Sumter?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. His mother was Thomas Sumter's sister. And of course I've got a copy of his will, and he left his wife's children and the children that Kissy had in her second group of children, all the same thing. So the historian assumes that they couldn't marry because she couldn't prove she wasn't still married, which is sad, but 2 of those children were killed in the Civil War. But times do change, because Ted's grandmother, surely she knew that. I mean, after all, that's where they were buried, you know. And she never told her children. So we waited until the last aunt of Ted's died before we gave this information to the rest of the family, because people were kind of embarrassed about things like that then. But they should have been proud that she did find somebody that loved her, and surely in God's sight they had made vows. And let me see. My grandmother Sue. Really, I was closer to her growing up than the other grandmother, even though the other grandmother lived next door. Mama Sue took up time with me. And I remember standing in a chair to make biscuits and cookies. She made me my own baking pan. She took a pot lid. A long time ago, most of the pot lids were metal, and they had like a dome on the top with a little wooden knob, and you could unscrew the knob, and she took that knob off and took the hammer and flattened it out, and that was my biscuit pan. But I had to be careful not to put one in the middle. I had to have a burned spot on it. But that's just We always made the chocolate chip cookies because that's what kind I liked. That was before Ziploc bags, that sort of thing. So she saved the Dixie Crystal sugar bags, and we put cookies in those and put a clothes peg on them. It wasn't a clothespin, it was a clothes peg. Can you think of somebody else?
You said you had a story about my dad.
Oh, yes. A lot, but I tell him. He was kind of big for his age. And when he was 4 and 5 years old, he'd fuss every time I had to go to town during the morning, which was much easier for me to take one child shopping than to wait till the others got home from school. Anyway, I carried him down. We had one store in town that had fabric and scissors and thread and baby blankets and just kind of a general department store. Not much choice, but better than driving 35 miles. Anyway, we got home one day and he said, "Look what I've got." And it was a spool of thread. You know, they had them lined up, pretty colors and everything. I said, "Whitney, did you pay for that?" He said, "No, ma'am." I said, "Then it's not yours." And he started crying. I said, "You don't need to cry, you got to take it back." And he said, "You take it back." I said, "No, I didn't take it." So we got right back in the car and we went down there, and I just parked right in front of the store. And he had to get out by himself and go in there and give him back that spool of thread and tell him he was sorry. When he was in college, he did, part-time work here and yonder for spending money and stuff, and he applied for a job at a, I don't remember if it was the fast food place or 7-Eleven or something. Anyway, he had to take a polygraph test. And he called us that night. He said, "I think I failed." I said, "How could you fail a polygraph test?" He said, "Well, they asked me if I'd ever stolen anything before." And he said, "I couldn't think of a thing but that spool of thread."